Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Edison and M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy in Auckland, New Zealand. I am Josh Edison, and are you in Zhuhai, China, Dr. Dentith?
I am in Zhuhai, China. Yes, This is so. Listeners to the show will be aware that our schedule has been somewhat erratic.
Patchy?
Yes, so we came back in February with a blockbuster episode, and then we promised regular installments, and frankly, those regular installments have not been at all regular. Now, this is largely due to me, because not only have I returned back to China to work, but I've returned back to China with my partner, who has started a new job. We've moved apartments, and there's just been a lot of rigmarole about setting an apartment up, going to work, going away from work, traveling to work, traveling away from work. There's a lot of finagling going on, but now things have settled down, and I am confident in my assurances of the notion that regularity will resume now.
From this point on, absolutely nothing can go wrong, apart from the half hour of stuff that went wrong before we started recording this one. But anyway.
We've had, if today's recording is slightly weird, slightly off, or just slightly strange, we have both technological issues with the recording equipment I'm using in Zhuhai, because I've moved most of the recording equipment to Guangzhou. And also, I think Zencastr isn't working properly at the moment.
It has been a little flaky, yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that probably means we should start talking about something substantive fairly quickly, just in case it all falls apart.
It's true.
So what we're going to talk about today, though, is, of course, you, Dr. Dentith, and the crazy things you've been up to in this intervening period.
Really
because
particularly crazy.
Well, no, not really. But I'm trying to sell it.
Actually,
I'm trying to hype you up a bit.
The kind of thing I do. I mean, they might be abnormal or strange to people who aren't research academics, but actually, we're talking about a very normal part of my life.
That's true. No, because I can't remember if we mentioned this in either of the previous episodes, but while you were back here, you did attend a little, what would you call it, a mini conference?
A 2-day workshop. We're getting into a really interesting semantic difference here between a conference or a workshop, in that normally when people talk about workshops, you're workshopping paper ideas. And yet actually what we really had was a conference, because conferences are basically workshops of ideas. And that normally in most academic settings, when you attend a conference, you are presenting a paper that is not yet published, which means you are technically workshopping it at a conference, as opposed to workshopping it at a workshop, which means that most workshops are conferences, and most conferences are workshops. And really, it's just a nomenclature thing as to whether you call something a conference or a workshop, whether it takes place on 1 day or 2 days, which is to say, it was a workshop, but some people might call it a conference, and frankly, I wouldn't blame them for doing so.
Right. Well, this workshop/conference, it was kind of organised in your honour, from what I gather. The fact that you were back in the country was the excuse for putting this thing together at University of Waikato, was it?
Yeah. So Joe Ulatowski, who works in the philosophy program. I'm trying to remember how we refer to things back in Aotearoa, New Zealand now, because in the old days we had departments of philosophy, and there really aren't that many departments of philosophy left. You have philosophy programs, you have philosophy schools. The philosophy program at the University of Waikato invited me to basically give a talk, and we decided that we would make it into a workshop/conference thing instead. So over the course of 2 days, we had grand old times down in Waikato talking about conspiracy theories, fake news, disinformation, and the threats or apparent threats thereof.
So at this conference/workshop, you presented a paper. How many other, I guess, papers were there?
So we had friends of the podcast. We had Melina Sarpos and Julia Dutz give papers. Alexios was going to give a paper as well, but he was struck down by a vile illness and was unable to present. Steve Clark, who we've heard from on this podcast, also gave a paper. So Joe gave a paper on. Andre gave a paper. I don't actually know whether Andre listens to this podcast. I don't think he's a podcast listener. But Andre, if you are listening, you gave a paper that I can attest to. There were a number of papers given. I think about basically 6 papers per day.
So, but what this is your podcast. So we're going to talk about your paper.
Our podcast, Josh. Our podcast.
Well, it is, but in relation, I certainly there is no our paper. There's only your paper. So I was just going for a bit of parallelism there. But at any rate, your paper is what we're going to talk about today. So let's chuck a chime in or something, and then let's do that.
Now, Josh, I gave you 2 options for experiencing this paper. I gave you a written form and also a video of the paper. Which one did you devour?
More. I was going to say more the former than the latter, but I realise I've immediately forgotten which order you gave those options in as you said them. But what I did was I started watching the video and I watched you introduce the paper. But then when you started actually going into the paper, I stopped and switched to reading it because I can read faster than you can talk, basically. So I heard.
And I refuse to believe it.
So I went through your paper in written form, but I did get to hear you give your justification
in excruciating detail.
Oh God, barely at all. But no, I did get to hear you introduce it and say that it's basically a petty act of vengeance, or at least petty act of pettiness.
Yeah, I mean, which I don't mention in the paper version, only in the presentation version. So there is a school of thought that goes on amongst some philosophers that there is a stable conception held by the folk as to what a conspiracy theory is. And that stable conception is that conspiracy theories are, in some sense, mad, bad, or dangerous theories/beliefs. So when people talk about conspiracy theories, what they're talking about are theories or views that they take to be prima facie false, or at least prima facie irrational. If you hear about a conspiracy theory, you ought not to believe it. Now, I'm not sure that there is a stable conception held by the folk as to what a conspiracy theory is, because I take it from what we know about folk beliefs about conspiracy theories, they're rather fuzzy. All of the polling data we have indicates that some people think that conspiracy theories can be true, some people think all conspiracy theories can be false, some people worry about whether something is labeled as being a conspiracy theory is an accurate label, etc., etc. So I'm doubtful there is a stable conception held by the folk that we can point to then say, well, look, this is what the folk believe about conspiracy theories. I also think it's a ridiculous notion to then say we should insist that we use folk notions in academic research. So there's a long-standing debate in the philosophy of the sciences and philosophy of the social sciences, which is basically just because the folk believe X about a scientific hypothesis, that shouldn't constrain scientists from acting on that folk notion. Historically, one of the better examples of this is that most people have entirely the wrong idea about heat. So when they think about heating their homes, they are thinking about keeping the cold out. So they pump their houses full of heat to try and push the cold away. Well, actually, when you think about it, what you need to be doing is keeping the heat in. You want to insulate your home from the outside world. And this led in the UK in the middle of the 20th century to the British government basically having to re-educate the British population to go, look, when you're heating your home, close your bloody windows. Because yes, you're pumping lots of heat into your homes, but if your windows are open, that heat is escaping. You need to insulate your home from the outside world, which then led to encouraging people to keep their windows closed in winter to trap heat within their homes, and then double glazing, and now in some countries triple or quadruple glazing. Folk notions are often quite wrong, and it seems to be inappropriate to insist that people doing research into rarefied ideas use fuzzy and abstract notions. So I've always had this skepticism about this appeal to an ordinary language conception of conspiracy theory. And so this paper was basically a reaction or a preemptive strike against people who go, oh, we should use the ordinary language conception of conspiracy theory in academic research. But crucially, I'm not going down the philosophy of science route of simply saying, look, it's ridiculous that we should be using folk notions in academic research. I go for a slightly different way of approaching this problem.
Now, in your video, you did mention having been, at least in part, motivated to do this by reviewers or possibly one reviewer rejecting papers on the grounds that they did not use a folk definition of conspiracy theory. And
yes,
this being slightly your stab at them.
Out there who is going around advising major revisions or outright rejection because people aren't using ordinary language conceptions of conspiracy theory. And I just don't think the argument is there to insist that people have to use the ordinary language conception in academic debate, especially given when they make that argument, they're pointing towards literature which doesn't really support the contention that the ordinary language conception is in wide use outside of philosophical discussion on conspiracy theory.
Hence leading to your paper with the title, Do We Agree What Exactly is a Conspiracy?
Now, that's a workshopped title there. I'm still not entirely sure that title has the kind of zing I need, but it's doing for the time being.
I myself would say, do we agree what exactly a conspiracy is? But I don't know. Anyway, that's the working title, and I mean a lot of it. The first, I don't know, half, maybe 2/3 of it is very much that sort of literature survey kind of a thing, where you refer to lots of different people saying lots of different things about conspiracy theories and how they define them, and the desire or possibly need for an ordinary language version of conspiracy theories, people talking about that, I'm kind of skipping past the first bits fairly quickly because a lot of it is stuff that we have said before. In your section 2, you get on to the ordinary language argument of people saying why we need. Oh, sorry, that's here we go. I'm just scrolling down to that, but there was the business about unnecessary antagonism and needlessly belligerent argumentation. Some people suggested that that by sort of sticking your heels in and saying, no, we need to define things this way, that you're just holding up what could otherwise be a fruitful discussion with your pedantic definition business.
Yeah, so Juha Raika, Juha Ruttalo, M. Julia Napolitano, and Martin Baldry have made similar claims. So Juha Raika and Juha Ruttalo have taught that's the needlessly belligerent argumentation quote comes from their paper. I think it's on climate change conspiracy theories. And they seem to be arguing that, philosophers have been arguing for particularism, and it's just getting in the way of evolving a decent social science of conspiracy theories. M. Julia Napolitano and Martin Baldry have kind of made a joking comment that, we're digging our heels in, and thus we have to persuade those pesky social scientists to get on track. And I find this both needlessly belligerent on their behalf, in that normally philosophical argumentation, there is a certain degree of antagonism because you are attacking each other's ideas either in order to refute them or to improve them. And so what is normal philosophical practice here has been treated as being strange, abnormal, and aggressive. So I think it's an interesting move to then go, there are people criticizing our views. They're being needlessly belligerent about it. In which case, that's how philosophical argumentation works. And that you attack ideas and not people. And yet, by talking about our work as being needlessly belligerent, you're attacking the people giving the ideas rather than the quality of the ideas on display. But the other thing which amuses me about this is that I'm one of the few philosophers who is doing work with social scientists on conspiracy theory. I was invited to the workshop in Kent last year. I work with Joe Usinski. I'm one of the few philosophers that the social scientists are actually interested in workshopping ideas with. So if I am being needlessly belligerent, the social scientists don't seem to think that is happening. It seems to be the philosophers who think that, not the people that apparently I'm being aggressive towards. And that allows me to kind of say that I was invited to give a commentary on a recent piece by Lottie Plummerer and Karen Douglas on the effective model of conspiracy theory belief, which has just come out in Psychological Report. I was invited by those authors to write a reply piece to it. So I am one of the few philosophers who is involved in the social science literature, despite the fact that I'm being accused of getting in the way of that literature.
Yes, and that's a little bit the theme of this paper. It sounded like that people make claims about what people think, but when you actually look at what they say and think, possibly those claims are not true. But earlier, so in your second section, where you talk about what people say, one thing that I saw coming up a couple of times in the quotes that you give is people sort of saying, it seems like they're saying, we want the folk definition, or we want a definition that builds in a sort of a pejorative sense to conspiracy theories, because what we're interested in talking about are the ones that are mad, bad, or dangerous, because it's not a fruitful question to ask, why do people believe perfectly sensible things? Because they're perfectly sensible. We want to know, why do people believe things that are in some way irrational or silly? And so that seems fair enough. And spoilers, I think you do have sort of a response to that at the end. But it does lead into your section 3, which is these people who think there is this folk definition of what a conspiracy theory is, and that's what we should be looking for, because that allows us to ask the questions that we're interested in. The thing that they think people think about conspiracy theories may not actually be what they think. And so your section 3, what the ordinary language generalists think the folk think, goes through a bunch of people giving a bunch of definitions of what people think. And I found this very interesting, the way the things that people say. Like we've looked in papers plenty where people say, define conspiracy theories as by definition malevolent, or by definition contrary to the official view, and what have you. But there are a few sort of a few nuances that I hadn't seen before. I'm skipping down. Okay, sorry. Yep. The interesting definitions I was thinking of are actually in your section 4, which is why I was having a damn hard time finding them in section 3. But you talk about, what the generalists think the folk think, and then you talk about what the social scientists seem to believe, which is, again, this tension that supposedly exists, and yet, as you say, there you are working along with them nicely. So it was this section 4 was the one that I personally found the most interesting, because it had about the first ones were things that were all fairly familiar to me, just because they go over ground that we've talked about plenty of times before when we've talked about various papers.
I mean, maybe it might be useful for the listeners, though, who don't have the ability to peer into your mind. So basically, what I said in that earlier section is that the generalists who think that we should be using an ordinary language conception all seem to have different ordinary language conceptions. So they all think the folk think different things. Juha Riker thinks that most of the time conspiracy theories are false, but they can sometimes be true. So he's going a kind of prima facie unlikely claim. Whereas M. Julia Napolitano, in her own work, says no, they're just by definition false because they're self-sealing views, and she claims that's what the folk believe. But M. Julia Napolitano, when she co-wrote a paper with Kevin Rutter in the same year, has a completely different notion, of what the folk think. So the generalists who insist upon an ordinary language conception all seem to be pointing to different ordinary language conceptions, which shows that there is no stable ordinary language conception, and also there's no consensus amongst the ordinary language generalists as to which of those conceptions we should pick out and use. And that seems to be a problem for their project, because they're saying, oh, we can just refer to the ordinary language conception of a conspiracy theory as being mad, bad, or dangerous, but they're all diagnosing the mad, bad, or dangerous in ways which are sometimes merely contrary, but sometimes actually contradictory.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was having trouble saying something about those sections because I just sort of read them and just kind of nodded the whole way down, going, oh, yep, sounds familiar. But it wasn't until I got to section 4 that I sort of go, ooh, that's an interesting take on things.
So section 4, which is where I survey the social science literature, I think is particularly interesting because I also think particularists have got the social science literature wrong, or at least we've got it wrong in a really interesting way.
So there are a bunch of quotes from a bunch of different peoples that say things like, so here's the first one, I think this is the first one, yes, your first quote in section 4 from Douglas Usinski and others. Conspiracy theories are attempts to explain the ultimate causes of significant social and political events and circumstances with claims of secret plots by two or more powerful actors. So there, I mean, I see that one doesn't bake the idea of malevolence into it, but significant. The conspiracy theories only apply to significant events, which of course is a fairly vague term, but that's a spin I hadn't seen so much before. The next one is fairly standard. The narratives that offer an explanation of important social events, the narrative stand as an alternative to the official ones, government, academic, institutional, etc., usually containing an assumption about a small group of malevolent, powerful actors collaborating in secrecy. So I think those are all possibly conditions that we've seen people put on things before. But then you have a couple of pages worth of them. So what were the interesting ones? Conspiracy theories are defined as a singular secret plot by a group of powerful elites to gain undue power over the economy, political system, or other institutions, from Robertson and others. Usually defined as explanations of events based on the concealed role of an evil group. There and others, 2020. Conspiracy theories are attempts to explain the ultimate causes of significant social and political events as secret plots by powerful and malicious groups. There's both of them again. But it was really the one on page 23 by Douglas and Sutton. That's Karen Douglas and Peters?
And Robbie Sutton.
Robbie Sutton. No, Peter Sutton isn't home.
So Karen is from Australia, Robbie is from New Zealand.
Oh, well, there you go. So the one that interested me, that they have a longer definition, and it starts... A comprehensive definition describes a conspiracy theory as a belief that two or more actors have coordinated in secret to achieve an outcome, and that their conspiracy is of public interest but not public knowledge. I thought that was an interest. That's not a spin on it I'd heard before. The idea that conspiracy is something that would be in the public interest, which obviously discounts your surprise birthday parties and what have you. But yes,
at least a surprise birthday party for a dictator.
Possibly yes.
That being in the public interest.
But I thought that one, it goes on. So they say, from these defining features of conspiracy theory, other characteristic features follow logically. And so here's this is where I started raising an eyebrow. They say this: conspiracy theories, A, are oppositional, which means they oppose publicly accepted understanding of events. Well, okay, I suppose, when we're talking about, if we assume it's something that would be of public interest. But then B, describe malevolent or forbidden acts, which seems like a bit of a jump. I assume it's just because they're not public knowledge. The only reason they're not public knowledge is because they're bad and people don't want you to know about them. But that one seemed like a bit of a jump.
Yeah, I do agree. That's one of those things where people sometimes keep secrets which you might suspect are malicious, but not every secret is kept for a sinister purpose. Secret keeping is suspicious, but it's not necessarily sinister in nature.
Yeah, and then also that means they ascribe agency to individuals and groups rather than impersonal or systemic forces. Which I think is possibly a fair enough criticism of conspiracy theories at times, although again, I don't know that it follows logically from their definition. And then D are epistemically risky, meaning that though individual conspiracy theories are not necessarily false or implausible, conspiracy theories taken collectively are more prone to falsity than other types of belief. Again, something I think you could possibly argue for, but something that I don't know follows from that base definition. And E are social constructs that are not merely adopted by individuals but shared with social objectives in mind, and that have the potential not only to represent and interpret reality but also to fashion new social realities, which see above comments, I think. So yeah, I found it. I just found this section out of the whole thing the most interesting to read through, because it was just interesting, I guess, for me, as someone who does not read through this sort of stuff all the time, unlike yourself, to see these things that people are actually saying, which are a little bit different to the sorts of things that I'm used to hearing.
Yeah, so my thesis in that section is that the ordinary language generalists are always pointing to the social science literature and going, look, social scientists are using something close to an ordinary language definition. Philosophers should get on board with that. And so I went, let's actually look at the definitions being offered by the social scientists. And a lot of them, and I would actually say probably a plurality, if not a majority of them, if not particularists, because there are particularists who go, look, conspiracy theories need to be of some pith and moment. So Charles Pigton has the idea that they need to be about big events. You don't have conspiracy theories about surprise parties. You have them about political events. Or they need to be, in some sense, contrary to an official theory, the kind of definition put forward by Curtis Hagen and Patrick Brooks, or my simple and minimal definition, which doesn't bake in any of those things. A lot of these definitions are, if not outrightly particularist-friendly definitions. They're very congruent with the kind of work that's going on in particularism. So if the ordinary language generalist is pointing to the social science literature and going, look, philosophers need to use definitions like those being used in the social sciences, then we can say, well, luckily, we are. You ordinary language generalists, you are the ones who are out of step with the social science literature.
Continuing on in the interesting definitions, we have one from Wagner Egger and others 2022 saying that conspiracy theories have, for instance, been recently defined as serious accusations of conspiracy of elites or outgroups without sufficient proofs and labelled as injustice without evidence, which again, that's not a take I'd heard before. It's a conspiracy theory if it's a theory about conspiracies that doesn't have sufficient proof. Which
so that's one of the more generalist friendly definitions you find in that set, but it's not one of the common definitions.
No, another one, conspiracy theory, is defined as the unnecessary assumption of conspiracy when other explanations are more probable, which again bakes in things that I haven't seen before. So you give this, as you say, this is where in the section you're giving some sort of fairly generalist type definitions of conspiracy theories, but then, as you say, here are other ones that sound particularist. Here's you one from Imhoff. Doug Imhoff? Roland. Damn it, where am I getting these first names from? I've heard these names in papers, but my database of...
It's either going to be comic book writers or artists you're associating with conspiracy theory theorists, or you're the Josh Addison from the parallel reality that used to be
where everybody has different first names,
but hasn't actually been brought up in about 5 years.
But no. So at any rate, this definition goes: only a subset of specific conspiracy theories are normatively implausible beliefs, although arguably these are the ones most frequently studied and the most resonant of lay understanding of the term. There are a number of conspiracy theories that have evidence in their favour. That the Nazis conspired to annihilate European Jewry, that Mohammed Atta and other al-Qaeda terrorists plotted in secret to fly passenger planes into the World Trade Center, or that a group of members of the Nixon administration secretly wiretapped and broke into the headquarters of the Democratic Party. What these conspiracy theories have in common is that they are well accepted and there is good evidence for their accuracy. So yes, that sounds like a very particularist sort of view of things. Conspiracy theories are a much wider view of things, and it's only particular ones that are implausible, whereas others there is good evidence for.
Yeah, that Roland Imhoff definition is actually quite fascinating for the sheer fact that Roland is one of the people who pushes the idea of what's called a conspiracy mentality. There are people who are predisposed to have views about conspiracy theories. But interestingly enough, when he talks about a conspiracy mentality, he goes, look, it cuts both ways. You can have a conspiracy mentality that means you see conspiracies that don't exist. But at the same time, you can have a conspiracy mentality which helps you uncover actual instances of conspiracy. And there also might be a conspiracy mentality that means you end up ignoring actual instances of conspiracies in your policies. So there's nothing inherently wrong about having a conspiracy mentality. You just need to be able to diagnose when that mentality produces positive results as opposed to when it produces negative results.
And so, moving on, you have your little section 4.1, which is the particular kind of a definition, which is the I know it when I see it definition, which I think is the thing that, without possibly saying it, I think lots of people have been referring to. This is the thing I always go on about when people want to say conspiracy theories are implausible, and then you say, well, but hang on, there's a whole bunch of conspiracy theories that really happen, and then they essentially reply, yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean those ones, those particular ones. And so this does seem to be the sort of thing that a conspiracy theory, I may not be able to define one, but I know it when I know one when I see one, which I guess. Yeah, you get onto the idea of motivating examples, which, people are motivated. There are questions they want to ask, there are things they want to talk about, and there are these particular examples of conspiracy theories that are good examples of them. Again, nobody wants to talk about why do people believe perfectly reasonable things that there's lots and lots of evidence for. They want to know why do people believe these strange things that there perhaps isn't much evidence for. And as examples of those, they can bring up conspiracy theories that appear to fulfill those criteria. But the problem is, you go through a couple of problems, don't you? Why am I trying to paraphrase? I can actually quote you directly. The problem is that A, not enough work is done via these motivating examples to license the more general claims about the problems of conspiracy beliefs, and B, the lack of detail provided for these motivating examples means that it is never obvious that the motivating examples are themselves unwarranted. So yes, just because you can point at something that is definitely a conspiracy theory and definitely seems like an irrational thing to believe, doesn't mean that you can then say conspiracy theories are irrational to believe, which is a more, again, motivations. Yes, you can easily point at one conspiracy theory and say this is a weird thing to believe, but maybe here's why people believe it. But then if you're writing an academic paper, I assume you want to have a larger a conclusion with a greater scope to that, to be able to actually say something in more general terms, because simply proving that one single instance of a conspiracy theory is irrational doesn't do much for anyone. So I can see, why they want to go from these examples to wider trends, but as you say, doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah, so I mean, to my mind, the issue here is that the definitions in use seem to be quite particularist, if not particularist friendly. Actually, I should say quite particularist friendly, if not actually outright particularist. And then they use examples of what the researcher assumes is an obviously false conspiracy theory, often described in such a way that actually you can quibble about whether it's obviously false or not. So the example I've used in the past is that people talk about the umbrella term of 9/11 conspiracy theories as if the entire suite of conspiracy theories under that umbrella, that is a weird mixed metaphor, suite, umbrella, the entire set of conspiracy theories under that umbrella term must be obviously false. And of course, some of them you might think are obviously false. Hologrammatic planes flying into the Twin Towers and explosions being set off seems like a much more false theory than a controlled demolition. So there's a range of plausibility amongst those different options. And there are going to be some actually quite plausible conspiracy theories in that set, along the lines of, well, CIA had enough information to stop the event, but for organizational purposes failed to prevent the prevent 9/11 from happening and have been engaged in a conspiracy ever since to cover that up, which I take is probably a very plausible conspiracy theory about what happened post 9/11 and the CIA's actions. So you can't just generalize from a vaguely described example. But the other issue is that they're only using these, to the researcher's mind, obviously false conspiracy theories to motivate their analyses. And that seems weird given the particularist friendly or particularist definitions. Why are they only focusing on these unwarranted ones to get to their conclusions? Why aren't they also going, it is interesting though, isn't it, that according to our definition about sinister elite behavior, some of the things that we call conspiracy theories also end up being true. What do we make of that? So I just think it's unusual, and I think it's what has given particularists the notion the social science literature is generalist, that they only focus on what the researcher thinks is an obviously false theory.
Yes, you finished that bit up by saying this seems to also be a problem for the generalists who prefer that we should use an ordinary language conception of conspiracy theory. Sometimes, like Riker, they admit that some conspiracy theories can be true, i.e. particular theories, but they take it that overall the abstract class of things known collectively as conspiracy theories are, in some sense, deservedly suspicious. It seems that what is driving such analyses is that people talk about certain well-known and unwarranted conspiracy theories in a dismal way, and this drives a push towards thinking all such theories are probably dismal in a similar way. Which leads you on to your conclusion, which I read through this quite quickly, and one bit of it really stuck out to me, and as I scroll past, I see that involves skipping over about 3 pages of argumentation. Okay, 2 pages of argumentation. So I'm just going to do that anyway, because this is the bit that I wanted to talk about. So if I skip something that you think is important, do say so. But I liked the fact that you try to resolve the issue by agreeing that you can start with a minimal definition, just as you say, a conspiracy theory is an explanation that cites a conspiracy as a salient clause, and then winnow down that definition to the particular kinds that these researchers want to talk about in their particular paper, because that's what they're interested in this particular paper. So you say we say, okay, conspiracy theory is any theory about a conspiracy, but in this paper I'm going to talk about those conspiracy theories that are also counter to official theories, or that also propose that the conspirators are engaged in criminal or immoral acts, or are also unlikely, or are also completely imaginary, never happened at all. Which does seem a nice sort of compromise, while staying particularist, but letting people pick out particular classes, I guess, of conspiracy theory,
or
the ones they want to talk about.
Of theories that they want to look at.
Yeah, and that does seem sort of more useful, because then I don't know. It does sort of seem to be the kind. I'm a little bit in two minds of it, thinking about it, because it seems like in the philosophy papers we looked at before, at least, that we've had people try to say, here is the subcategory of conspiracy theories that are inherently irrational and that you are allowed to be suspicious of, whether they're mature, unwarranted ones or the various other ones we've looked at, and those never seem to work out too well. So I don't know. I mean, it certainly seems fruitful to look at a particular subcategory of conspiracy theories that have all the same feature. I wonder what sort of conclusions you could draw from such an investigation.
Well, yes, I mean, it's an olive branch. So, use a simple minimal definition. Narrow your scope to the theories that you're interested in. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the conclusion you desire. Because, yes, as you are rightly pointing out here, you may discover that even when you're investigating the subclass, may turn out that it's not necessarily irrational to hold those particular beliefs, or there might be some disturbing similarities between beliefs in that subclass and other beliefs which are considered to be widely normal beliefs in our society. So it is an olive branch, leaf?
Olive branch, yep.
Yeah, olive branch. I'm suddenly going, I actually don't know why we're just olives here. That's one of those metaphors that when you teach in a foreign country and you start going, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to hold out an olive branch to someone? Why are you holding out an olive branch? What's olives got to do with peace here? It is an olive branch. I don't necessarily think it's going to be fruitful for the researchers, because I still think there's going to be some impediment to their research program with the assumption that they can find the obviously false examples they then want to generalize from.
But as you say, this means we'd no longer have to track an ordinary language definition or set of definitions, and thus not assume, as it seems we've been doing incorrectly, a pejorative dimension to a term that the folk seem to use non-pejoratively. It would allow us to demarcate how we talk about conspiracy theories academically from worries about ordinary language understandings of conspiracy theory. So yes, it's a nice way to not necessarily hobble yourself by insisting that you stick to a particular definition, which might not be the aspect that you're trying to look at.
Yeah.
So how was this received?
I agree with myself.
Yes. How was this received?
It seemed to be very well received by the attendees. It'll be interesting to see how it is received when it goes through peer review. So I'm hoping to finish up work on the paper in the next month or so and then send it out. But no, the attendees all seem to agree with me. Justine Kingsbury, who was my former PhD examiner when I did my PhD through the University of Auckland, was going, well, look, it's quite obvious that the psychologists are only interested in those bad beliefs. So you can't expect them to be doing investigations into good conspiracy theory beliefs. They only want to diagnose what's wrong with the bad conspiracy theory beliefs. And my response to that is quite simple. Yeah, just admit you're working with a subclass. Don't generalize. Admit it's a subclass of belief. We're interested in those conspiracy theories with these particular bad characteristics. Don't just then assume they've all got those bad characteristics. Or at least don't give the impression from your research that all conspiracy theories have those bad characteristics when your definition doesn't bake that in.
Yes. I mean, there's no you can't in a completely different context. You wouldn't say, people who are interested in structural failures of bridges or buildings or something, they're only going to study the things that fall down. That doesn't mean that you can say all bridges or buildings are structurally unsound. It's you're interested in a particular thing, and that's okay, because that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's that classic image on the internet of the Spitfire with all of the bullet holes.
Yes.
Yeah, so no, you don't. You actually want to study the substructure which doesn't have the holes rather than the structure with the holes, because those are the planes that come back.
I remember hearing that I can't remember the details, but apparently that picture doesn't actually tell the story. Like, people get the wrong idea about that, but I don't know what the right idea is, so I'm gonna keep using it as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to assume that I have the right idea and won't investigate it any further, because who has time for research in an era like this, Josh? Who has time for research?
No, there's only time for listening to podcasts, which is what you should be doing, all of you, and what you are doing right now. And what we have been doing, perhaps...
If you heard that sentence, you were listening to a podcast. The podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Yes, and that possibly gives a nice segue into the end of this episode and the beginning of the next one, because we must record a bonus episode for our patient patrons who've been waiting for a bit since the last one. And we're going to talk about podcasts and probably other things as well.
Well, yes. I mean, we can't really avoid the news.
No, it's a bit difficult. So yes, we'll talk about some stuff.
It's so big. It's going to be quite difficult to talk about it as well.
So, for now, though, that was an interesting look at what you were up to on your break. So sorry, I guess I should have just said at the end, you're going to tidy this up and submit it, and hopefully it will see print in a journal and what have you. Yes, so there will be more to come from this particular paper.
Yes, certainly. I'm always coming.
Yep, always. It's a known fact. So anyway, that's it. That's it. We're done. I'm putting a line under it. I'm bringing things to a close. I still haven't come up with a decent catchphrase to end episodes on. So I'm just going to end this episode by saying, "Oh Jesus, look over there!"
And I'm off to oscillate an otter.
Still think that voice is just too sexy. I will not be held responsible for what happens to our listenership if you keep using that voice. You want to, don't you? You want to say something else. You're editing this episode. You do whatever you want. Leave it in, take it out, whip it out. I'm not fussed. I don't even care anymore. It's all meaningless.
Goodbye.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy features Josh Addison and Associate Professor M.R.X. Dentith. Our producers are a mysterious cabal of conspirators known as Tom, Philip, and another who is so mysterious that they remain anonymous. You can contact us electronically via podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or join our Patreon and get access to our Discord server. Or don't, I'm not your mum. And remember, he who laughs last is standing behind you right now.